The room shimmered with golden candlelight, its soft glow casting fleeting shadows across the ornate walls. I sat there, my fingers clutching a delicate piece of paper, its edges crisp yet trembling in my hands. The words, scrawled in ink so dark it might as well have been spilled secrets, read, "The game begins at midnight. Make your move wisely or lose everything." My breath hitched. Every letter seemed to pulsate with malice, and yet it beckoned me. The dinner table before me was a vision of elegance, a feast meticulously arranged, untouched and glistening under the chandelier's glow. Silverware sparkled like tiny daggers and crystal glasses stood empty, as if waiting for some dark toast. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I set the note down carefully, afraid it might ignite if I stared too long, but its weight lingered, heavier than the silence settling over the room. Then the sound, laughter. Soft at first, like a whisper in the distance, but growing richer, fuller, until it felt as though the walls themselves were mocking me. I spun around, my chair screeching against the polished marble floor. The grand house, luxurious in every way, had never felt so vast or so suffocating. Who was here? And more importantly, who had left the note? My mind raced. I didn't recall locking the door, but this wasn't a place where strangers wandered in uninvited. This was deliberate. The game, whatever it was, had already begun, and I was its reluctant player. I glanced back at the note, my chest tightening. Midnight was only an hour away, and the question loomed. What was I about to lose? From the outside, my life was flawless, the kind that made people whisper behind manicured hedges or scroll enviously through curated photographs. Victor, my husband, was the kind of man who belonged to another era, suave, impossibly handsome, and dripping with old-world charm. He was a philanthropist, the kind whose generosity was written about in glossy magazines. We lived in a mansion that could have been plucked from a fairy tale, complete with sweeping staircases and gardens that bloomed as if in reverence to him. But perfection, I had learned, was an illusion, a glimmering surface stretched too thin over something darker. Victor was always surrounded by people, but never mine. His powerful friends would glide through our home like ghosts at a masquerade, their laughter carrying secrets I was never meant to understand. Their eyes would flick to me briefly, dismissively, before returning to their conversations, as though I were some ornamental part of the decor. Victor had a way of explaining it away, his words as smooth as the silk ties he favoured. "You're too good for them, darling. They can't see past their own egos to appreciate you." And yet, it was I who felt like the outsider, as if I were forever standing on the wrong side of a velvet rope. Then there was Victor himself, a man of contradictions. He could be attentive, his touch warm and lingering, or distant, with a coldness that seeped into the spaces between us. There were nights when his phone would buzz incessantly and he'd step out of the room muttering vague excuses about work. Questions about his late nights and mysterious business trips were met with charming deflections. "Trust me, Eleanor," he'd say with that disarming smile of his, as if trust were a currency I'd always have in abundance. I wanted to believe him. But tonight, sitting alone in that vast dining room with the cryptic note before me, I wondered if I'd built my life on a foundation of shadows. The laughter still lingered, faint now, but insidious. Who had left the note, and what did they know about the cracks in my perfect life? The announcement came without warning, as Victor so often preferred to do things. That morning, as I sipped my coffee and stared out at the sprawling gardens, he strode into the room, his tone light but his words heavy with intent. "We're hosting a dinner party tonight," he said, casually adjusting his cufflinks as though this revelation wouldn't upend my entire day. "Just a small gathering, my inner circle." Inner circle. The phrase lingered in the air like a faint whiff of smoke, curling its way into my chest. His inner circle wasn't just a group of friends, it was a curated ensemble of power, influence, and intrigue. The guests began to arrive as the sun dipped low, casting the mansion in hues of orange and gold. First was the artist, an enigma wrapped in silk scarves and an air of studied indifference. His work hung in galleries worldwide, yet his reputation was as infamous as it was celebrated. The retired judge arrived next, his gait deliberate, his eyes sharp as though still weighing evidence in a courtroom. Then came the politician, whose presence made the air feel heavier, his smile practiced and predatory. And finally, the tech mogul, a young billionaire who seemed to glide through life on algorithms and arrogance. I greeted them all with the practiced warmth of a hostess, my smile fixed as they entered, bringing with them an energy that felt charged and ominous. The house, already vast, seemed to expand and shift around them as if accommodating their presence. Victor, as always, moved effortlessly among them, his charisma magnetic. He seemed to draw them in with ease, the way a conductor wields an orchestra. I stayed close enough to listen, but not so close as to intrude. Their conversations were a symphony of cryptic remarks and veiled barbs. It wasn't just what they said, it was the way they acted. The artist's fingers, stained faintly with paint, traced patterns on the rim of his wine glass as he exchanged a knowing glance with the judge. The politician leaned in close to the mogul, their words too soft to hear, but their smirks unmistakable. And Victor, my Victor, stood at the center of it all, orchestrating their interactions with the subtle skill of someone who had done this many times before. His eyes would occasionally flick to me, as though checking that I was playing my role. I smiled when I had to, laughed when it was expected, and refilled glasses like the perfect wife. But inside, unease coiled tight in my stomach. As the evening wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was the only one out of step in a carefully choreographed dance. This wasn't just a dinner party, there was something more beneath the polished surface, something I was being deliberately kept from seeing. The clinking of silverware began to dwindle, the conversation mellowing into a soft murmur as the final course was cleared away. I could feel the weight of the evening settling in, heavier now, like a storm cloud ready to burst. Victor stood suddenly, his presence commanding as he tapped his glass with the edge of a knife. The room stilled, all eyes turning to him with an air of expectation. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice smooth and deliberate, "it's time for our annual tradition." The air shifted, a collective energy rippling through the room. The artist leaned back in his chair, a faint smirk playing on his lips. The politician exchanged a quick glance with the judge. Only I seemed lost, untethered in the sudden intensity that gripped the room. Victor moved to the center of the table, his silhouette dramatic against the dimming chandelier light as the room darkened ever so slightly. From somewhere, I hadn't even noticed it before, he produced a polished mahogany box with intricate gold inlays. He set it on the table with a flourish, and it gleamed ominously. "The rules," he said, his tone almost playful, "are simple. Each of you will write down a secret. It can be anything, a truth you've never told, a confession, a revelation. Once written, your secrets will be placed into this box, locked away until midnight." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over us. "At the stroke of midnight, the secrets will be read aloud. Together, we will vote on the most shocking, the most scandalous, and the bearer of that secret will perform a dare of the group's choosing." There was laughter, low and knowing, from around the table. The artist chuckled as though this was a game he'd mastered long ago. The judge's lips curled in a tight smile, but his eyes betrayed nothing. The politician rubbed his hands together, his grin sharp as a blade. I, on the other hand, felt my stomach churn. A secret? What kind of secret? The idea of penning something so intimate, so vulnerable, and handing it over to this group of strangers felt suffocating. My instincts screamed to refuse, to excuse myself and leave the table, but Victor's eyes found mine, holding me in place with that familiar blend of charm and command. "Eleanor," he said smoothly, his voice softer but no less firm, "you'll join us, of course. This wouldn't be the same without you." I felt the others watching me, their gazes pressing against my skin like 1,000 tiny pinpricks. The room seemed smaller suddenly, the walls closer, the air thinner. I forced a smile, the kind that barely reached my eyes, and nodded. The artist handed me a slip of paper, his fingers brushing mine with deliberate carelessness. The judge slid a fountain pen across the table, its weight solid and cold in my hand. As the others eagerly began scrawling their secrets, I stared at the paper before me, my mind racing. What could I possibly write that wouldn't unravel me completely? What secret did I have that wouldn't destroy me when the clock struck midnight? The air in the room grew heavy as the clock slowly ticked toward midnight, each passing second stretching longer than the last. The guests, now all with their secrets locked away in the mahogany box, seemed to be waiting for something. But I wasn't waiting for the game to start. I was waiting for something I couldn't quite name. The unease that had nestled in my stomach from the moment the game had been introduced was now a full-blown knot, twisting tighter with every glance, every whisper. The room, once filled with the soft clinking of cutlery and light laughter, now hummed with a different energy, something darker, charged. The artist, always a mystery wrapped in layers of pretension, leaned toward the retired judge. Their voices were low, but I couldn't ignore the fragments of their conversation slipping through the cracks. "I told you," the artist said, his voice smooth like oil. "I've always been good at it. The painting was a perfect replica. They never knew." The judge chuckled, a low, knowing sound. No one ever does. But I'll admit it took guts to forge a Van Gogh. I'd never have the nerve. I felt a chill creep up my spine. A forgery? Was this what they were all hiding? Was this how it worked? Layer upon layer of deceit, each one more treacherous than the last? But it didn't stop there. The judge, his eyes flicking toward me for a brief moment, continued. "You remember that trial? The one where I bent the rules to favour my client? I may have stretched the truth a little, but it was all for the greater good, wasn't it? He paid me handsomely for it." My stomach lurched. A trial? Rules bent? The weight of his words sank in deeper, settling like poison in my veins. These weren't just games, these were confessions, each one darker than the last. I could feel the room closing in around me. It wasn't a game, it was a ritual. A twisted, orchestrated ritual where each guest was forced to confront their own sins, to expose their darkest secrets, to open up wounds they thought had been sealed. I looked around the table. The tech mogul, his fingers twitching nervously against his glass, seemed oddly distracted, his eyes darting toward the others, as though he were plotting something, or perhaps just calculating his next move. The politician was leaning in, his words a whisper that barely reached my ears, but the threat in his voice was unmistakable. "If your secret isn't good enough, there's always another way to make it interesting, isn't there?" Victor, standing at the head of the table, watched them all with a calculated calm, as though this was just another night in the game. His gaze never faltered from the clock, his eyes scanning the room, ensuring that every guest remained in line, that no one would dare disrupt the flow. I could feel the walls closing in, the clocks ticking, growing louder in my ears. The game wasn't just about secrets anymore, it was about power, about control. And somewhere in the shadows I realized there was someone pulling the strings. Someone who wanted to use these dark confessions to bend us all to their will. As I sat there, the weight of it all pressing on my chest, I couldn't help but wonder, who was the real player in this game? And what would happen when the secrets came to light? The seconds on the clock seemed to stretch longer. The tick, tick, tick echoing in my mind as my thoughts spiraled out of control. What am I supposed to do? I could feel the heat of my own panic rising, my pulse quickening with every passing moment. My hands, trembling, gripped the pen as if it might snap under the weight of my thoughts. I glanced at the locked box, already filled with the secrets of these people I barely knew, their confessions waiting like loaded guns. But what did I have to offer? A small, harmless lie? A half-truth? The walls seemed to close in on me. They all had secrets, dark ones, dangerous ones. And here I was trying to write something that wouldn't make me a target. But what could I possibly write that wouldn't tear me apart? My mind raced back to a moment years ago, a moment I'd buried so deep I'd almost convinced myself it had never happened at all. It was a cold night. The rain fell in sheets and my car slid helpless as I turned too sharply. The crash was deafening, the kind of impact that rattled your very soul. I remembered the smell of gasoline, the taste of fear in my mouth as I stared at the wreckage. The other car, thankfully, it was empty. I should have called for help, I should have reported it, but something in me snapped. The adrenaline surged, and all I could think of was escape. So I did what any rational person would do, right? I fled. I hid the car, made sure no one would ever know what I had done. And that secret stayed buried for years, gnawing the edges of my conscience. Until now. That memory clung to me like a shadow, its weight pulling at my insides. If they knew this, would they hold it against me? I couldn't risk it. I could already see it, the whispers, the accusing stares, the hands pointing. I'd be exposed for the fraud I really was, and I knew how Victor played this game. Once a secret was out, it became a weapon. No, I couldn't put that in the box. Not now, not with everything on the line. I closed my eyes for a brief moment, took a shaky breath and began to write. I once cheated on a high school test. The words felt empty, insignificant even. But it was safe. It was harmless. Who would care about a stupid test I'd taken as a teenager? But in my gut, I knew this was the secret I would choose. The lie that would keep me hidden, tucked away in the shadows of the others. I sealed the note in the envelope with a quiet prayer in my mind that it would go unnoticed, that no one would see through the veil of my carefully constructed lie. But as I looked around the room, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't the only one here pretending. And somehow, that made the whole thing feel even more suffocating. The game was about to begin. Would my harmless lie be enough to keep me safe? Or would the darkness of my own past eventually catch up with me? The clock struck midnight with a sharp chime that reverberated through the room, sending a shiver down my spine. The air, thick with tension, seemed to hold its breath as Victor stood to lead the proceedings. The others followed suit, gathering around the dimly lit table where the locked box sat, its weight now far heavier than it had ever seemed before. Victor smiled, his gaze sweeping over the crowd, every inch the charming host. But there was something darker in his eyes tonight. Tonight, I'm not just a guest in his world, I'm a player. Let the game begin, he said, his voice smooth, controlled, but underneath it, there was something razor-sharp that cut through the air. A servant, one I barely recognized, stepped forward and unlocked the box, revealing the secrets inside. One by one, she read the notes aloud, each revelation more shocking than the last. I could feel my heart pounding as the words floated through the room like poison, each confession dragging me deeper into a pit of dread. The artist's note was first. He'd confessed to forging priceless art. The room gasped, but there was something almost admiring in their reactions. A forgery? It was daring, perhaps even impressive, but it left no lasting damage. Then the judge's secret was read, a scandalous admission of corruption. He'd bent the law to serve a powerful client. The others murmured, but their words held a certain awe for the man's power, his ability to play both sides of the law with such precision. The atmosphere crackled with anticipation as the next note was drawn from the box. The tech mogul's confession hit hard. He'd stolen an idea from a competitor, a clear violation of trust. The room was tense. Some were outraged, but most seemed to relish in the drama, the scandal. Then, the servant pulled out my note. I held my breath. I knew what was coming, but the reality of it was still a shock to my system. The words, so innocent on the paper, now felt like a weight on my chest. I once cheated on a high school test. I could hear the chuckles ripple through the room. A high school test? Really? It was almost laughable, this pathetic little secret. The room erupted in laughter, some of them even wiping away tears, as if my confession was the most absurd thing they'd ever heard. I forced a smile, trying to mask the sudden rush of embarrassment flooding my cheeks. I wanted to shrink into the floor, to disappear entirely. But it was nothing compared to what I had feared, right? It wasn't dangerous, it wasn't a crime, it was trivial. Yet the laughter, as it echoed around the room, felt like daggers in my chest. But amidst the laughter, I caught something in Victor's eyes. His gaze was sharp, too sharp. As everyone else laughed, he didn't. He was watching me closely, his eyes narrowing, lips pressed in a tight line. There was something in his stare, a suspicion, a knowing glint that made my heart skip a beat. It was subtle, almost imperceptible to anyone else in the room. But to me, it felt like he had seen straight through the lie I had told. Had he figured it out? I quickly glanced away, trying to focus on the others, pretending to join in their amusement, but it was impossible. His gaze lingered on me, cold and calculating, and for the first time that night, I realized the game wasn't just about secrets. It was about power. Victor's power. And I was starting to wonder if I'd just made a fatal mistake by underestimating it. As the laughter died down, the room fell into an eerie silence, and I could hear the pulse of my own heart thudding in my ears. What would happen next? Would my harmless lie suffice? Or would Victor expose me for what I truly was? And worse, was I the only one playing this game, or had I already been played? The atmosphere shifted suddenly, like the last gust of wind before a storm. Laughter and clinking glasses filled the room as everyone cast their votes for the most scandalous secret. The game was starting to lose its edge, and for a brief moment I dared to think that maybe, just maybe, I'd made it through unscathed. The tech mogul, young, sharp, and far too confident for his own good, was declared the winner. The secret he had revealed was far from trivial. He had hacked a government database. The confession was chilling, but the group seemed to enjoy the drama of it, almost as if they were applauding his audacity. "Well, I guess you've earned your punishment," Victor said with a sly grin, his voice dripping with amusement. The crowd murmured their agreement, their faces lighting up with mock enthusiasm. One of the guests, an older man, whose face seemed permanently etched with a knowing smile, suggested, "Why don't you donate a portion of your wealth to charity, my dear friend? That should be a fitting punishment for someone who thinks he's above the rules." Everyone laughed. It was a harmless suggestion, a little jab that fit the mood of the evening. The tension that had gripped the room earlier seemed to dissipate, replaced by the heady warmth of intoxication. For a moment, I felt relief. The night might end with nothing more than a few embarrassing confessions, a game played and forgotten. I thought about the quiet retreat of my bedroom where I could lie down, close my eyes, and escape the eyes that had holes into me. But that was before the power went out. Without warning, the lights flickered and died. The room plunged into darkness, and the sound of hushed murmurs filled the air, followed by the metallic click of a switch. Then, just as quickly, a blood-curdling scream shattered the silence. It wasn't a scream of surprise, it was a scream of terror, raw, guttural, and unmistakably real. My body went stiff, and I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. The laughter was gone, replaced by a heavy stillness. For a long moment, no one spoke. I held my breath, straining to hear, trying to make sense of what had just happened. A low voice echoed through the room, trembling with disbelief. What the hell was that? I tried to move, to make sense of the panic that had begun to settle in my chest, but the darkness was suffocating. The scream rang in my ears like an alarm bell, but no one dared to move. Then, from the far side of the room, I heard footsteps, shuffling, hesitant. Someone was moving, but who? Was it one of the guests? Was it Victor? My mind raced, desperately trying to piece together the fragments of sound and shadow. I wanted to speak, to ask if everyone was all right, but the words caught in my throat. It wasn't just fear that gripped me now. It was a sense of growing dread, an instinct that told me something was terribly wrong. Then another scream echoed, closer this time. It was followed by the sound of a body hitting the floor. The power didn't return. The room was still shrouded in darkness, save for the faint glimmers of moonlight filtering through the windows. And in that silence, that oppressive silence, I realized this was no longer just a game. It was a nightmare. The world came rushing back into focus with the flicker of the lights. It was as if time had frozen in that moment of darkness. And now it was unraveling at a pace I could barely comprehend. The room seemed to breathe again, but in a way that felt wrong. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of fear. And then I saw him. The judge. The once proud man who had been laughing and joking just minutes ago was now slumped in his chair, his once sturdy frame lifeless. His glass of wine was tipped over, the red liquid pooling across the table like a crimson stain against the pristine white tablecloth. The first person to speak was a woman near the back of the room, her voice trembling, almost too afraid to believe what she was seeing. Is he dead? The room collectively held its breath. No one moved. No one spoke. We all just stared at the judge's body, unable to process the truth. The man who had been part of the game, who had shared in the twisted tradition with us, was now a victim. Victor was the first to react. His usual charm, his calm composure, evaporated as he stood up abruptly, his face ashen. "Call an ambulance!" he ordered, his voice harsh, yet strangely distant. But it didn't matter. No one moved. No one could. The walls, once symbols of luxury and opulence, now felt like an unbreakable prison. The doors were locked, the windows sealed. The mansion was no longer a safe haven. It was a tomb. The realization sank in like a stone in my stomach. We were trapped. It wasn't just a game anymore. I was barely aware of the commotion swirling around me. People were panicking, rushing to check on the judge, yelling at Victor to do something. But through the chaos, something caught my eye. A piece of paper slipped quietly under my plate. It wasn't there before. It had to have been placed there during the frenzy of the blackout. Slowly, my hand reached for it, trembling as I unfolded the note. "You've been hiding something, haven't you?" The words were like ice, cutting through me, stealing what little breath I had left. My heart pounded in my chest as I read them over and over. The handwriting was unfamiliar, and yet it sent a chill down my spine. Who had written it? What did they know? I could feel the weight of eyes on me, even though no one was looking directly at me. It was as though everyone knew. Everyone could sense that something was off about me, that I was hiding something. And suddenly, the secrets of my past didn't feel like a distant memory. They felt like a ticking time bomb waiting to explode. I folded the note quickly, stuffing it into my pocket as if it could somehow disappear with it. But the feeling didn't go away. It lingered, suffocating me, like a dark cloud casting its shadow over everything I thought I knew. Victor was at the judge's side now, shouting for help, but his words were drowned out by the rising panic in the room. Everyone was talking at once, trying to make sense of the horror before us. But no matter how hard we tried to cling to logic, the truth was clear. Someone in this room was responsible for the judge's death, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't sure if it was one of them, or if it was me. The game had taken a deadly turn, and I was in it deeper than I ever wanted to be. The chaos in the room spiraled faster than I could keep up with. What had once been a carefully curated evening of secrets and lies had now morphed into something far darker, something that threatened to swallow us all whole. Whispers filled the air, each one sharper than the last. Eyes flicked nervously from one person to the next, searching for answers. Accusations began to build, like bricks stacked high, and suddenly I was at the center of it all. "Eleanor," someone said, their voice trembling with accusation. "You were the last to see him alive." I recoiled, my heart hammering in my chest as the weight of the words hit me. The room seemed to close in on me, the walls pressing tight as I searched for something, anything, that could prove my innocence. "I didn't," I began, but my voice faltered. My hands were shaking uncontrollably, and I could feel their eyes on me, dissecting every move, every twitch. Victor's gaze burned into me from across the room, a mixture of confusion and suspicion swirling in his eyes. The man I had once trusted, the man I had built a life with, now seemed like a stranger whose silence spoke volumes. "You're acting strange, Eleanor," the tech mogul remarked coldly, his words biting through the tense air. "A little too nervous for someone who's just lost a dinner guest." I looked around at the others, at the artist who had been eyeing me for far too long, at the politician whose sharp, calculating smile never seemed to leave his face, and the retired judge's colleagues, who were now acting more like vultures than the dignified people they had pretended to be. No one was innocent here, but my mind raced. Why had they turned on me? Victor, the one person I thought I could trust, remained silent, his lips pursed in a tight line. He knew something, I could feel it in the pit of my stomach. But what? And then, just as quickly as the accusations started, the next secret was revealed, a shocking confession from the retired judge's colleague, a tale of manipulation, betrayal, and a hidden fortune. No one could escape the web of deception that was tightening around us. I realized then that this was no ordinary game. This was something far more sinister, something Victor had been orchestrating long before this night. Something I hadn't seen until it was too late. The inner circle wasn't a group of friends, it was a collection of players, each with a role to play in a twisted game of survival. But who was pulling the strings? The truth had become my only weapon, my only hope for survival. I needed to find out exactly what Victor had been hiding, what he had planned for all of us. I couldn't trust any of them. The alliances that had seemed so solid were crumbling before my eyes, turning into accusations and threats. If I didn't act quickly, I was going to be the next one blamed. I stepped away from the group, trying to steady my racing heart. I needed answers, and there was only one person who could give them to me: Victor. But how could I confront him when every word he spoke seemed to mask more than it revealed? I moved toward the study, where Victor had disappeared after the judge's body was discovered. The door was slightly ajar, the faintest creak as I pushed it open, revealing him sitting at the desk. He didn't look up at first, as if lost in thought, or maybe calculating his next move. "Victor," I whispered, my voice trembling. He looked up, his expression unreadable. There was a moment of silence between us, a moment where all the weight of the night hung in the air. "Eleanor?" His voice was cold, distant. "You don't understand what's happening here." "You never did." I stepped forward, urgency in my voice. "I know what you're doing, Victor. This isn't just a game. You've been planning this for far too long. What do you want from me?" Victor stood suddenly, his face hardening into a mask of indifference. "What I want, Eleanor, is simple: survival." I felt a chill rush over me. What was he talking about? Survival? He couldn't mean survival, my voice barely above a whisper. Victor's lips twisted into a grim smile. "Everyone has a role to play in this, Eleanor, and yours is just beginning." My stomach dropped. The darkness in his eyes, the coldness in his words made it clear I was no longer a partner in this game. I was the pawn. And unless I uncovered the truth about the mansion, about the game, about Victor, I wouldn't make it out alive. I turned and bolted from the room, my breath coming in sharp gasps. I could hear him calling after me, but I couldn't stop now. I couldn't trust anyone. Not Victor, not the others. I had to play the game, and this time I was going to play to win. I ran through the mansion, my footsteps echoing against the marble floors as panic surged in my chest. The walls felt like they were closing in, suffocating me with the weight of the truth I was only beginning to uncover. My mind raced, trying to piece together the fragmented conversations, the cryptic clues, and the unnerving looks exchanged between the guests. But one thing stood clear above the rest. Victor was not the man I thought he was. And now, I was beginning to see the depths of his deception. I stumbled into the library, my hands trembling as I scanned the shelves. Among the dusty volumes, I spotted a row of locked drawers. My pulse quickened. This was where the answers would lie. As I fiddled with the drawer's lock, the sound of footsteps made me freeze. I turned quickly, heart in my throat. It was Victor. He stood in the doorway, watching me with a calmness that sent a chill down my spine. "You're looking for something, Eleanor?" he asked, his voice smooth, almost mocking. "Victor, what is this?" I demanded, my voice shaking despite my best efforts to remain composed. "What's really going on here? You've been manipulating everyone, playing us all for fools!" His eyes darkened, and for the first time, I saw the true mask slip. There was no affection, no warmth in his gaze, just cold calculation. "I'm disappointed, Eleanor," he said, his tone cold. "I thought you were smarter than this." He walked toward me, every step deliberate, as if savouring the moment. "This wasn't just a game for entertainment, Eleanor," he continued, his voice low and threatening. "It was always about power, control. You think those people were my friends? No, they were pawns. They still are, and so are you." I stumbled backward, horrified by his words. "No, this is madness." Victor's lips curled into a twisted smile. "Not madness, strategy." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a file, a thick folder that looked suspiciously like one of many he had kept hidden from me. "I've been gathering dirt on all of them for years, Eleanor," he said, his voice growing colder. "Every secret, every mistake, every weakness. And each year I use the game to keep them in line, to remind them who holds the power." My heart skipped a beat. "The murder," I whispered, my voice barely audible. That was a warning?" Victor's smile grew darker. "Yes, a warning for anyone who thinks they can cross me. You see, Eleanor, the dinner party was never about fun or games, it was always about leverage. And now that leverage is mine to use however I please." My stomach twisted in disgust. The people I had once thought of as part of my life, Victor's friends, his inner circle, were nothing but puppets to him. But it wasn't just about the game, not anymore. The stakes had risen, and the murder was only the beginning. "And you," Victor continued, stepping closer, his voice dropping to a whisper, "you're the perfect scapegoat." I froze. The weight of his words hit me like a freight train. "What?" I gasped, unable to comprehend what he was saying. "You're saying you plan to blame me?" Victor nodded, his smile never wavering. "It's simple, Eleanor. You have a past, one you've worked hard to bury, and if you think for one second that anyone will believe you over me, you're wrong. You've always been good at hiding your secrets, but not well enough. He tossed the file onto the table, and I could see it clearly now. Documents, photographs, and records that detailed my darkest moments. My car accident, the cover-up, everything I had hoped to forget. My stomach churned as I realized how thoroughly he had been tracking me all along. "Victor, you," I choked out, the weight of betrayal crushing me. He interrupted me with a sharp laugh. "Don't look so surprised, Eleanor. You think you're the only one with a dark secret? I've known about your little accident for years, and I've been waiting for the perfect moment to use it against you." A feeling of cold dread washed over me as I realized the full extent of his manipulation. The game was never just about power, it was about control, about holding each of us hostage with our own vulnerabilities. "You're insane!" I spat, stepping away from the table. "You really think you can get away with this? You can't control everyone forever." Victor's eyes darkened. "I don't need to control everyone, Eleanor. I just need to control the right people. And you, my dear, are the key to my survival." The sound of shuffling footsteps interrupted us, and my heart lurched. The others were coming. The rest of the guests were still trapped in the house, growing more desperate by the minute, and I could feel the tightening noose of suspicion closing around me. "What will you do?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. "Let them all think I did it? That I'm the murderer?" Victor's smirk widened. "They'll never know. They'll never suspect me. And you'll play your part, Eleanor, because if you don't, well, let's just say that your secret will be the least of your worries." I stood there, trembling, my mind racing. I had to find a way out, a way to turn this game around before it was too late. But the walls were closing in, and Victor had made it clear. I wasn't just a pawn. I was the scapegoat, the one he would throw to the wolves if it meant saving himself. The game was far from over, and now it was my turn to make a move. The moment Victor turned his back, I seized the opportunity. My hands trembled as I grabbed the file from the table, clutching the damning evidence that could bring him down. His voice echoed in the library, mocking, confident, and so sure of his control that he didn't even notice me inching toward the door. "You'll never win, Eleanor," he said, his tone almost bored. "Even if you try, no one will believe you." I didn't respond. My heart thundered in my chest as I slipped into the hallway, my mind racing. The house was still alive with tension, the other guests scattered, their unease palpable. I had to find them. They had to know the truth. Bursting into the dining room, I slammed the file onto the table, the sound startling the few who remained. Their eyes widened as they saw me, sweaty, panicked, but determined. "Look at this!" I shouted, my voice breaking under the weight of urgency. "Victor's been blackmailing all of you. He's kept records, secrets, everything, right here!" One of them hesitated, stepping forward to flip through the pages. Gasps filled the room as they began to see their own lives laid bare. Scandals, lies, weaknesses, all catalogued with meticulous precision. "This is insane," someone muttered, their voice trembling. "He killed the judge to scare us into submission," I said, my words spilling out faster now, desperate to make them see. "And he's planning to blame me for everything, don't you see? This whole night was just another one of his games!" A voice from the back of the room called out, shaky but resolute. "Victor wouldn't do that." "He would," I cut in, my voice firm. "And he has. You've all let him control you for years, but now you have a choice. Keep letting him win, or stand with me and stop this." The tension in the room thickened as they turned to each other, the weight of realization dawning on their faces. Suddenly, Victor appeared in the doorway, his composure unraveling. "Eleanor, stop this nonsense," he barked, his voice sharp and commanding. "They're not going to believe you over me." But the tide had shifted. The artist stepped forward, holding one of the incriminating documents. "Is this true?" he demanded, his voice low but seething with anger. Victor faltered for a fraction of a second, just long enough for the others to catch on. "It's all true," I said, my voice steady now. "He's been manipulating all of us, and tonight he went too far." The guests closed in around him, their voices rising in a cacophony of anger and betrayal. Victor's mask of control shattered, and for the first time I saw fear in his eyes. Taking advantage of the chaos, I backed toward the door, my pulse racing. I had done what I needed to do. I had planted the seed of doubt, exposed him for what he was. Slipping into the night, I felt the cool air hit my face, sharp and liberating. My legs carried me down the winding driveway, my breath ragged but my resolve unshaken. Victor had spent years building his empire of lies, but now it was crumbling. I wasn't just escaping the mansion, I was escaping the control he'd tried to exert over my life. As I reached the road, I vowed to do more than survive. I would take what I had learned, what I had seen, and make sure the world knew the truth.